Continuing on with right intention in life of the Buddha. And now with the rest of these path factors, we go fairly briefly into all of them. The survey of right view is now concluded. The next factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is right intention. And then I'm going to try just kind of reading through these because there's so many quotes from different places. But anybody who wants to see where they could come from, it's from pages 237 onward in Life of the Buddha. What is right intention? It is the intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of non-cruelty. This is called right intention. When a noble disciple has clearly seen with right understanding, as it actually is, how little gratification sensual desires provide, and how much pain and despair they entail, and how great is their inadequacy, and he attains to happiness and pleasure dissociated from sensual desires and unwholesome states, or to something higher than that, then he is no more interested in sensual desires. Even if, this one's from Simile of the Saw, Majjhima 21, even if bandits brutally severed him limb from limb with a two-handled saw, one who entertained hate in their heart on account of that would not be one who followed my teaching. He does not choose for his own affliction, for others' affliction, or for the affliction of both. And that sums it up for right intention. And right speech. These two factors of right view and right intention together constitute the group of path factors, understanding, panya. Now the third factor, right speech. What is right speech? Abstention from lying, slander, abuse, and gossip. This is called right speech. Here someone abandons lying. When summoned to a court or to a meeting, or to his relative's presence, or to his guild, or to the royal family's presence, and questioned as a witness thus, "So, good man, tell what you know." Then, not knowing, he says, "I do not know." Knowing, he says, "I know." Not seeing, he says, "I do not see." Seeing, he says, "I see." He does not, in full awareness, speak falsehood for his own ends, or for another's ends, or for some petty worldly end. He abandons slander as one who is neither a repeater elsewhere of what is heard here for the purpose of causing division from these, nor a repeater to these of what is heard elsewhere for the purpose of causing division from those, who is thus a reuniter of the divided, a promoter of friendships, enjoying concord, rejoicing in concord, delighting in concord. He becomes a speaker of words that promote concord. He abandons abuse. He becomes a speaker of such words as are innocent, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, as go to the heart, are civil, desired of many and dear to many. He abandons gossip as one who tells that which is seasonable, factual, good, and the Dhamma and discipline. He speaks in season, speech worth recording, which is reasoned, definite, and connected with good. That's from Majjhima Nikaya 41. Right action. And the fourth factor, right action. What is right action? Abstention from killing living beings, stealing, misconduct in sensual desires. This is called right action. When a lay follower possesses 5 things, he lives with confidence in his house and he will find himself in heaven as sure as if he had been carried off and put there. What are the 5? He abstains from killing living beings, from taking what is not given, from misconduct in sensual desires, from speaking falsehood, and from indulging in liquor, wine, and fermented brews. Right livelihood. And the 5th factor, right livelihood. What is right livelihood? Here a noble disciple abandons wrong livelihood and gets his living by right livelihood. Scheming, persuading, hinting, belittling, and pursuing gain with gain, this is called wrong livelihood for bhikkhus. There are 5 trades that a lay follower should not ply. What 5? They are trading in weapons, living beings, meat, liquor, and poisons. Right effort. These last 3 factors, right speech, action, and livelihood, constitute the group of path factors, virtue, sila. They are known as the preliminary stage of the path. Now comes the 6th factor, right effort. What is right effort? Here a bhikkhu awakens desire for the non-arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome states, for which he makes efforts, arouses energy, exerts his mind, and endeavors. He awakens desire for the abandoning of arisen, evil, unwholesome states, for which he makes efforts. He awakens desire for the arising of unarisen, wholesome states, for which he makes efforts. He awakens desire for the continuance, non-corruption, strengthening, maintenance in being, and perfecting of arisen, wholesome states, for which he makes efforts, arouses energy, exerts his mind, and endeavors. This is called right effort. And then right mindfulness, and this one, Bhikkhu Ñāṇamoli goes through most of the Mahasatipatthana Sutta, and I think it's just good to read it, just to read it out as is. It's a good reminder. Now comes the 7th factor, right mindfulness. What is right mindfulness? Here a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as a body, ardent, fully aware, and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. He abides contemplating feelings as feelings, abides contemplating mind as mind, abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects, ardent, fully aware and mindful, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. This is called right mindfulness. How does a bhikkhu abide, contemplating the body as a body? Here a bhikkhu, gone to the forest, or to the root of a tree, or to a room that is void, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, set his body erect, and established mindfulness in front of him. Mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. As a skilled turner or his apprentice, when making a long turn, understands, I make a long turn, or when making a short turn, understands, I make a short turn. So, breathing in long, the bhikkhu understands, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus. I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus. I shall breathe in, tranquilizing the bodily formation. He trains thus. I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. He abides contemplating the body as a body in this way, either in himself or externally, or in himself and externally. or else he contemplates in the body either its factors of origination, or its factors of fall, or its factors of origination and fall. Or else mindfulness that there is a body is established in him to the extent of bare knowledge and remembrance of it while he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Again, when walking, a bhikkhu understands, I am walking. Or when standing, he understands, I am standing. Or when sitting, he understands, I am sitting. Or when lying down, he understands, I am lying down. Or whatever position his body is in, he understands it to be so disposed. He abides contemplating the body as a body externally, or else he contemplates the factors of origination and fall, or else mindfulness, not clinging to anything in the world. That also is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating the body as a body. Again, a bhikkhu is fully aware in moving to and fro, in looking ahead and away, in flexing and extending the limbs, in wearing the outer cloak of patches, the bowl and other robes, in eating, drinking, chewing, and tasting, in evacuating the bowels and making water. And he is fully aware and mindful in walking, standing, sitting, going to sleep, waking, talking, and keeping silent. That is also how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Again, as though there were a bag with two openings, full of many sorts of grain, such as hill rice, red rice, beans, peas, millet, and white rice, and a man with good sight had opened it and were reviewing it. This is hill rice, this is red rice, this is beans, this is peas, this is millet, this is white rice. So too a bhikkhu reviews this body up from the soles of the feet and down from the top of the hair as full of many kinds of filth. There are in this body head hairs, body hairs, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, midriff, spleen, lights, bowels, entrails, gorge, dung, bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, oil of the joints, and urine. That also is how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Again, as though a skilled butcher or his apprentice had slaughtered a cow and were seated at the four crossroads with it cut up into pieces, so too, in whatever position a bhikkhu finds this body, he reviews it according to the elements. There are in this body earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. That is also how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Again, a bhikkhu judges this same body as though he were looking at a corpse thrown on a charnel ground, 1 day dead, 2 days dead, 3 days dead, bloated, livid, and oozing with matter. This body too is of such a nature, will be like that, is not exempt from that. That is also how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Again, a bhikkhu judges this same body as though he were looking at a corpse thrown on a charnel ground, being devoured by crows, vultures, dogs, jackals, and the multitudinous varieties of worms. As though he were looking at a corpse thrown on a charnel ground, a skeleton with flesh and blood and held together by sinews, a fleshless skeleton smeared with blood and held together by sinews, a skeleton without flesh or blood held together by sinews, bones without sinews scattered in all directions, here a hand bone, there a foot bone, there a shin bone, there a thigh bone, there a hip bone, there a backbone, there a skull, or bones bleached white, the color of shells, or bones heaped up more than a year old, or bones rotted and crumbled to dust. He thinks, this body too is of such a nature, will be like that, is not exempt from that. It's the 9 charnel ground contemplations. That also is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating body as a body. And how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating feelings as feelings? Here, when feeling a pleasant feeling, a bhikkhu understands, I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling a painful feeling, he understands, I feel a painful feeling. When feeling a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. When feeling a materialistic pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel a materialistic pleasant feeling, and so on. When feeling an unmaterialistic or unworldly, or sometimes translated as spiritual, when feeling an unmaterialistic pleasant feeling, he understands, I feel an unmaterialistic pleasant feeling, and so on. He abides contemplating feelings as feelings in this way, either in himself or externally, or in himself and externally. Or else he contemplates in feelings, either their factors of origination, or their factors of fall, or their factors of origination and fall, or else mindfulness that there are feelings is established in him to the extent of bare knowledge and remembrance of it while he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a bhikkhu abides, contemplating feelings as feelings. How does a bhikkhu abide contemplating consciousness as consciousness? Normally we translate mind as mind, but Bhikkhu Ñāṇamoli translates it as consciousness. Here a bhikkhu understands consciousness affected by lust as affected by lust, and that unaffected by lust as unaffected by lust. He understands consciousness affected by hate as affected by hate, and that unaffected by hate as unaffected by hate. He understands consciousness affected by delusion as affected by delusion, and that unaffected by delusion as unaffected by delusion. He understands contracted consciousness as contracted, and distracted consciousness as distracted. He understands exalted consciousness as exalted, and unexalted as unexalted. He understands surpassed consciousness as surpassed, and that unsurpassed as unsurpassed. He understands concentrated consciousness as concentrated, and that unconcentrated as unconcentrated. He understands liberated consciousness as liberated, and that unliberated as unliberated. He abides contemplating consciousness as consciousness in this way, either in himself or externally, or in himself and externally. Or else he contemplates in consciousness its factors of origination, or its factors of fall, or its factors of origination and fall. Or else mindfulness that there is consciousness is established in him to the extent of bare knowledge and remembrance of it, while he abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is how a bhikkhu abides contemplating consciousness as consciousness. And how does a bhikkhu abide contemplating mental objects as mental objects? Here a bhikkhu abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects in terms of the 5 hindrances. How is that done? Here, when there is desire for sensuality in him, he understands, there is desire for sensuality in me. Or when there is no desire for sensuality in him, he understands, there is no desire for sensuality in me. And also he understands how there comes to be the arising of unarisen desire for sensuality, and how there comes to be the abandoning of arisen desire for sensuality, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned desire for sensuality. When there is ill will in him, when there is lethargy and drowsiness in him, when there is agitation and worry in him, when there is uncertainty in him, he understands how there comes to be the future non-arising of abandoned uncertainty. That's the 5 hindrances. Again, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects in terms of the 5 aggregates affected by clinging. How is that done? Here a bhikkhu understands such is form, such its origin, such its disappearance. Such is feeling, such its origin, such its disappearance. Such is perception, such its origin, such its disappearance. Such are formations, such their origin, and such their disappearance. Such is consciousness, such its origin, such its disappearance. So that's the 5 aggregates. Again, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects in terms of the six bases in oneself and external. How is that done? Here a bhikkhu understands the eye and visible forms and the fetter that arises owing to both. He understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen fetter, and how there comes to be the abandoning of the arisen fetter, and how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. He understands the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and flavors, the body and tangibles, the mind and mental objects, and the fetter that arises owing to both. And he understands how there comes to be the future non-arising of the abandoned fetter. So that's 6 sense bases. Again, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects in terms of the 7 enlightenment factors. How is that done? Here, when there is the mindfulness enlightenment factor in him, a bhikkhu understands there is the mindfulness enlightenment factor in me. When there is no mindfulness enlightenment factor in him, he understands there is no mindfulness enlightenment factor in me. And he understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen mindfulness enlightenment factor, and how there comes to be the development and perfection of the arisen mindfulness enlightenment factor. When there is the investigation of states enlightenment factor in him, the energy enlightenment factor, the happiness enlightenment factor, the tranquility enlightenment factor, the concentration enlightenment factor, the equanimity enlightenment factor in him, he understands how there comes to be the arising of the unarisen equanimity enlightenment factor, and how there comes to be the development and perfection of the arisen equanimity enlightenment factor. So that's the 7 factors of enlightenment. Again, a bhikkhu abides contemplating mental objects as mental objects in terms of the 4 Noble Truths. How is that done? Here a bhikkhu understands according as it actually is. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Bhikkhus, were anyone to maintain in being these 4 foundations of mindfulness for 7 years, let alone for 7 years, for even 7 days, then one of 2 fruits could be expected of him, either final knowledge here and now, or else non-return. And then there's a few passages apart from this Mahasatipatthana Sutta. Bhikkhus, I shall expound to you the origin and disappearance of the 4 foundations of mindfulness. The body has nutriment for its origin, and it disappears with cessation of nutriment. Feelings have contact for their origin, and they disappear with cessation of contact. Consciousness has name and form for its origin, and it disappears with cessation of name and form. Mental objects have attention for their origin, and they disappear with cessation of attention. That's from Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 47, Sutta 42. All things have desire for their root. Attention provides their being, contact their origin, feeling their meeting place, concentration, confrontation with them, mindfulness, control of them. Understanding is the highest of them, and deliverance is their core. That's Anguttara Nikaya, Book of the Eights, Sutta 83. Would one guard oneself, then the foundations of mindfulness should be cultivated. Would one guard others, then the foundations of mindfulness should be cultivated. Who guards himself guards others. Who guards others guards himself. And I'll go into some of Luang Por Sumedho's comments, starting with Samma Sankappa, right thought, or right intention, right aspiration. But before I do that, is there any questions, comments?
I have a question for Luang Por. I've heard a couple teachers assert that the formulation of the Satipatthana Sutta as we have it now was probably compiled, or has parts that were compiled at a later date. And they say that in the original formulation of Satipatthana, the section on mental objects probably didn't include the 5 khandhas and the 6 sense bases, but was just hindrances and factors for awakening. Mm-hmm. And I found that
and Four Noble Truths.
And Four Noble Truths. I found that to be actually quite a useful dichotomy, focusing on hindrances and factors of awakening. But I'm just curious what your thoughts on that idea are.
Yeah, make a good case. Yeah, I mean, I'm not of the opinion that everything that is in the Pali Canon is the absolute word of the Buddha from the time of the Buddha. But it's also, I don't feel that the addition of the khandhas and the ayatanas are a departure from the things to be mindful of, and it certainly comes up through the suttas the importance of that. I mean, your Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta is using the Anattalakkana Sutta is using the khandhas as a basis for investigation, and the Adhita-Pariyaya Sutta is using the ayatanas as a sense basis, as a basis. So, obviously very important aspects of attention and reflection. It's not shocking to me that it could be a possibility. That those were kind of later additions. I think Ñāṇamoli is looking at some of the things in the Chinese agamas for coming up with that idea. So it doesn't disturb me.
In a way, it could even be helpful, like the I forms eye consciousness. He understands how fetters that arise based on that come to be, how they cease. Investigation. Something that came to my mind in that reading too was it might add further fuel to the flames of the strength of refutation of those like Luang Por Sumedho or Ajahn Mahabua, in terms of why does he say we're perfect already? The Buddha is saying clearly with right effort we have to develop these 7 factors of awakening. And that flies in the face of what Luang Por Sumedho is saying, but I don't think it does. I think the whole reason for Luang Por Sumedho's teaching is what he's pointing to is that's how you develop them. That's how you don't develop them by getting really kind of uppity and agitated. You develop them by, okay, here I am, right now. This is where I'm at. It's like this. Let's work with this. It's so hard just to do that. I think that's why he puts all that emphasis on.
Yeah, and he's providing a counterpoint. And he's certainly given, in the past, he's given more than enough teachings about the cultivation of the 7 factors of awakening and certainly the Four Noble Truths. I think as it gets older, it gets spare.
Yeah, like a distillation.
Yeah, distillation. Yeah.
So we'll do a little bit more of one for Sumedho here. Right Aspiration, second path factor from Four Noble Truths. The second element of the Eightfold Path is Samma Sankappa, sometimes translated as right thought, thinking in the right way. However, it actually has more of a dynamic quality like intention, attitude, or aspiration. I like to use aspiration, which is somehow very meaningful in the Eightfold Path because we do aspire. So that exactly, we actually do aspire to something. It is important to see that aspiration is not desire. The Pali word tanha means desire that comes out of ignorance, whereas sankappa means aspiration not coming from ignorance. Aspiration might seem like a kind of desire to us, because in English we use the word desire for everything of that nature, either aspiring or wanting. You might think that aspiration is a kind of tanha, wanting to become enlightened, bhava tanha, but samma sankappa comes from right understanding, seeing clearly. It is not wanting to become anything. It's not the desire to become an enlightened person. With right understanding, that whole illusion and a way of thinking no longer makes sense. Aspiration is a feeling, an intention, attitude, or movement within us. Our spirit rises. It does not sink downward. It is not desperation. When there is right understanding, we aspire to truth, beauty, and goodness. Samma ditthi and samma sankappa, right understanding and right aspiration, are called panya, or wisdom, and they make up the first of the 3 sections in the Noble Eightfold Path. We can contemplate, why is it that we still feel discontented, even when we have the best of everything? We are not completely happy, even if we have a beautiful house, a car, the perfect marriage, lovely, bright children, and all the rest of it. And we are certainly not contented when we do not have all these things. If we don't have them, we can think, well, if I had the best, then I'd be content. But we wouldn't be. The earth is not the place for our contentment. It's not supposed to be. When we realize that, we no longer expect contentment from planet Earth. We do not make that demand. Until we realize that this planet cannot satisfy all our wants, we keep on asking, why can't you make me content, Mother Earth? We are like little children who suckle their mother, constantly trying to get the most out of her and wanting her always to nurture and feed them and make them feel content. If we were content, we would not wonder about things. Yet we do recognize that there is something more than just the ground under our feet. There's something above us that we cannot quite understand. We have the ability to wonder and ponder about life, to contemplate its meaning. If you want to know the meaning of your life, you cannot be content with material wealth, comfort, and security alone. So we aspire to know the truth. You might think that that is a kind of presumptuous desire or aspiration. Who do I think I am, little old me, trying to know the truth about everything? But there is that aspiration. Why do we have it if it is not possible? Consider the concept of ultimate reality. An absolute or ultimate truth is a very refined concept. The idea of God, the deathless, of the immortal, is actually a very refined thought. We aspire to know that ultimate reality. The animal side of us does not aspire. It does not know anything about such aspirations. But there is in each of us an intuitive intelligence that wants to know, It is always with us, but we tend to not notice it. We do not understand it. We tend to discard or mistrust it, especially modern materialists. They just think it is fantasy and not real. As for myself, I was really happy when I realized that the planet is not my real home. I had always suspected it. I can remember, even as a small child, thinking, I don't really belong here. I've never particularly felt that planet Earth is where I really belong. Even before I was a monk, I never felt that I fitted into society. For some people, that could be just a neurotic problem, but perhaps it could also be a kind of intuition children often have. When you are innocent, your mind is very intuitive. The mind of a child is more intuitively in touch with the mysterious forces than most adult minds are. As we grow up, we become conditioned to think in very set ways and have fixed ideas about what is real and what is not. As we develop our egos, society dictates what is real and what is not, what is right and what is wrong, and we begin to interpret the world through these fixed perceptions. One thing we find charming in children is that they don't do that yet. They still see the world with the intuitive mind that is not yet conditioned. Meditation is a way of deconditioning the mind, which helps us to let go of all the hard-line views and fixed ideas we have. Ordinarily, what is real is dismissed, while what is not real is given all our attention. This is what ignorance, avijja, is. The contemplation of our human aspiration connects us to something higher than just the animal kingdom or the planet Earth. To me, that connection seems more true than the idea that this is all there is, that once we die, our bodies rot and there's nothing more than that. When we ponder and wonder about this universe we are living in, we see that it is very vast, mysterious, and incomprehensible to us. However, when we trust more in our intuitive mind, we can be receptive to things that we may have forgotten or have never been open to before. We open when we let go of fixed, conditioned reactions. We can have the fixed idea of being a personality, of being a man or a woman, of being an English person or an American. These things can be very real to us, and we can get very upset and angry about them. We are even willing to kill each other over these conditioned views that we hold and believe in and never question. Without right aspiration and right understanding, without panya, we never see the true nature of these views. So then he gets more into right speech, right action, right livelihood, but I'll leave it there for today. Five minutes for questions, comments.
Nice question. Do you have any ways of working or addressing consciousness? The kind of consciousness?
Like, in what sense?
Just kind of contemplating it and actually working with it.
Because consciousness, vijnana, is that which experiences. So the I experiences forms. Your experiences sound, even up to the mind experiencing thoughts. The factor of consciousness is that which kind of links those two together, and it's also connected with contact, because the I forms and I consciousness, the three of those coming together, and then there's I contact, that's like the flayed cow getting touched by contact. Any other comments before?
I think that's one of the things. I think it's really helpful to keep it to that level. Because in especially in Western writing, there's a whole, and philosophical religious ideas. Consciousness takes on a whole kind of mystical and that it's somehow separate from the body. And Buddhist practice and Buddhist analysis of experience keeps it very sort of grounded in that. Okay, consciousness is the being conscious of the six sense basis, and that, and of course it's just that quality of knowing. One of the things is also just in the word itself, vijnana, is to divide. So it's not some unit of consciousness. That's never the Buddha's kind of intention, especially as the fifth khandha. It performs a function of actually kind of dividing and having that experience of me here in the world out there. I mean, there are anomalies in the suttas but it's like a special kind of case. Whereas in terms of especially in terms of the khandhas, this is just keeping it grounded to, okay, what makes it all work, and what ties it together, what ties the other khandhas together is this the quality of consciousness and knowing the experience.
Yeah, and you can't really, so it's like vijnana that we're contemplating is impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. So it's like you can't really separate the knowing. It's always going out the eye, out the ear, out the nose, and so on. So it's like you can't separate the knowing from what is known by it. In that sense, it's impermanent. But then the contemplation is what's directing it. What's directing it to know in a certain way? What's directing it to view certain things and be repelled by other things? And so it's like there's a director directing it to know certain things and not other things as well.
And which is, and again, it's sort of that sense of the khandhas being conjoined, not disjoined, and that not trying to find a standalone thing that is disjoined from the other khandhas. It's just sort of these are conjoined, they're all of a piece.
And I think of like the reeds too, the simile of the reeds is like that idea that you can't separate the knowing from what is known. You can't separate consciousness from being form. One falls down, the other
falls
falls
down
as well. You can't separate the two.